we talk a lot about Roots, which to this day is still the finale of Roots is the third most watched episode of television ever, ever. I think like 60 million people watched that episode.
So, Barrett, let's talk about your new project, an Amazon original, The Underground Railroad, which, in watching all of the trailers and even reading a lot of the production notes, I have people who have given me the production notes. And just hearing your explainer for why this project was important. Again, much like Moonlight, the beauty of how this is shot is so striking. uh, Discuss your vision and just how you wanted it shot and how you wanted it to visually appeal to people.
Yeah, it was. This subject matter is one that's very tricky to cover. I think when we think about images, whether television shows, movies, or even articles about the institution of American slavery, there's so much trauma and pain associated with it, and then that trauma and pain oftentimes leads to shame. And so, I think in a certain way, we kind of create this vacuum. We just kind of try to put it out of mind. Um, I think by doing that, we don't deal with those images. We don't grapple with them. I mean, we do, but these folks who've been talking about making America great again for 4 years, they very conveniently don't have to grapple with it. And so it was important to me in now taking the mantle from Alex Haley's Roots. Gordon Parks made an adaptation of 12 Years a Slave in the 80s before Steve McQueen made his adaptation of 12 Years a Slave roughly 10 years ago. It was important to me to advance what I felt like was the visual depictions of this time. And I think that in addition to that pain and trauma, in order for Jemele Hill and Barry Jenkins to have this conversation, there also had to have been love, family, community, romance, all these things that are necessary for any human being, for any human race to endure, especially to endure the depravity, the barbarity that our ancestors had to endure. And so it felt like there had to be room for both. There had to be room for both. And then once I acknowledged that there had to be room for both, because otherwise you reduce the people who suffered under the condition of American slavery to purely trauma and pain. You say, oh, they couldn't have been human beings. They were robbed of their humanity. They had no access to love, to family, to any of these things, to community, because every time I see depictions of them, it's only through the prism of exclusively trauma and pain. That then does a disservice to those folks. And so once I realized, okay, one, when I first spoke to Colson Whitehead, the author, I said, I can't do this as a movie. It's got to be a series. I need the space to tell the truth about this thing, but also have the room to acknowledge all these other things, to give these folks back, the breath, the space to exhibit their full humanity. Once I convinced him of that and knew it was going to be a series, I was like, and now here's the next step. You know, if we're depicting trauma and pain, does it have to be visually traumatic and painful, dark, gray, all these other things? And then I realized, no, the brutality is even more horrific because these things were visited upon these folks, and yet there was so much beauty rampant all around. And that beauty still wasn't enough to reaffirm, to break through the system, to show that the inhumanity of what is being visited upon these folks is just even more barbaric. And so once we had that sort of like intellectual prism to work from, the visual palette of the story just revealed itself. I think also too, the story is told through the eyes of a young Black woman named Cora. And what I loved about what Colson did, Afrofuturism is this big topic that people talk about a lot. We often only talk about it in terms of the future. We don't think of these folks from our past, our ancestors, also being Afrofuturists. They probably were even more Afrofuturists because their bodies were so restricted that their minds must have been extremely free. And so every time she advances to a new state, boom, visually, we got a whole new language, and this language is dictated by this young Black woman. So yeah, it was actually once we unlocked it, it was one of the most rewarding aspects of making the show.
I know that sometimes not. I know. I mean, you know this as a fact. It's like because of the
Mhm.
culture we live in right now, things are just reduced to fast food bites, and so
Yep.
people, I'm sure, who are not familiar with this work will very easily want to put it in a category like, oh, here we go again, just another
Mhm.
black pain, trauma, and slavery. Is it trickier now to make material that deals with slavery in 2021 or 20 or this century, if you will, than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago, because the sensibility for this kind of work has changed so much? What kind of challenge did that present to you as a director?
Yeah, I think it is trickier, but I don't want to by any means say that it wasn't tricky for the folks that have come before me. I think the really interesting, we talk a lot about Roots, which to this day is still the finale of Roots is the third most watched episode of television ever, ever. I think like 60 million people watched that episode. And not on DVR, not on TiVo, I'm showing my age. They watched it live together. It's probably one of the few moments in this nation's history where that large percentage of the citizenship were all actively engaged with this one issue, the legacy of American slavery. So damn powerful. People talk about Roots and they talk about Mr. McQueen's 12 Years a Slave. They don't talk so much about Gordon Parks' adaptation of Solomon Northrop's, I guess we call it a memoir or autobiography. They don't talk about that one so much. And that's the one that's really interesting to me because for him, it was extremely tricky. You watch this film and you see that there are two mandates. One, he wants to tell the story of Solomon Northrop, this very tragic story. And he also wants to speak towards the institution of American slavery. And yet, he wants to do it in a way that the dignity of himself and the actors is so fully intact that the truth, and this is my opinion now, the truth of the indignity of the condition they're depicting, the film doesn't quite arrive at that. And I think because of the time he made it in, coming off of Roots and going through the 80s when so much actual shit is happening to black folks in the mid 80s right now, so much shit things that are almost compounded on these things he's talking about, but in a way so much more visceral and present because no one could have known what was going to happen, by 1989. No one knew. The neighborhoods were already starting to deteriorate. No one knew. I mean, it was like a crater. And so I can't imagine the mandate he was operating on, the societal mandate. And now here I come. Steve just, I mean, he just took slavery I mean, that movie is about slavery was fucking horrific, you know, and he takes that subject and he uses all his powers, and you can't watch that film and come away with anything else. You just can't. And now here I come with my images. And I think because of the work that Steve did, and I can call him Steve because he's a friend, that Steve did, Mr. Parks, and that was done on Roots, I think because of the work they did, I have so much freedom now and how I can depict certain things. I can, in the first episode, I can be so damn real. I can be just very forthright. And I don't think anything we're doing is over sensationalizing the truth of those images. Because having done the research, what actually happened was so much worse than anything we depict. And yet, I don't think the images in our first episode, I don't think Mr. Parks could have had those images in his film. I just think we weren't ready for it. You know, I think because of the work they did, I get to stand on their shoulders. I can have that, but I can also have damn trains running underground. Now, that's a lot of freedom. The trade-off is we live in a time now where somebody could reduce the show. You said the clickbait or the bite size. This whole show might be reduced to just that one image of that man suspended by his wrist. You know the moment I'm talking about in the first episode. It might be reduced to just that because you can put it in a tweet, you can do the screen cap, and boom, there it is. I can't have that in my head as I'm making the piece of art that I'm making and go, oh, I can't do this because, it's going to expose me to the clickbait, the one bite. It's going to confirm everyone's fears about what this show is, and it's going to confirm everyone's fears about what this show ain't. I
Mm.
can't. I got to just go out and make my work. And I have so much freedom because of the work that's been done by the artists before me, both the academics who've been writing on this subject for decades, and the artists who've come before me. And yet, yeah, I can't lie, man. You're right. You're right. Both in the attention span And I think in just the vicious, I don't know, this tornado of discourse that can happen, um, where almost my grandma used to have these bifocal glasses. It's almost like the whole image is in front of you, but you can only see that one little piece of the bifocal, and it's the piece you're looking for because it confirms everything you don't want this thing to be. But it's a 10-hour show, man. So I got to throw in the whole kit and caboodle. I'm sorry, that's a very long-winded
No,
answer.
no,
Very, very
everything
good
you
question.
actually within that answer address follow-up questions that I had in there. So you did made my job much easier. I called 12 Years a Slave the one hitter quitter because
Hmm.
I can only watch it. I only
Yeah,
watched it once. It's
yeah.
like that is. I mean, it's unbelievable, but at the same time, unbelievable in the best ways in terms of filmmaking. But it's a tough rewatch, and so
Hmm.
I've never attempted to watch it a second time because of that.